Hi, my name's Alice Bruno, and I have the pleasure today of interviewing Susan Meredith. Today is October 24th, 2007. I'm conducting this interview as part of the Connecticut Bar Foundation James W. Cooper Fellows Oral History of Connecticut Women in the Legal Profession project. This project is sponsored by the Connecticut Bar Foundation. Susan, it's a delight to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you to start by saying your name and where you were born.
I'm Susan Meredith. I was born in Troy, New York.
Now, I have to ask you the date of your birth. It's on the list of questions. That was a trick question you didn't know about.
That's right. August the 10th, 1944.
Okay.
Everyone except my mother hoped I would be born a week later because it would be my grandfather's birthday.
She couldn't hold off.
Right.
Those of us that have had babies know why you want to have that baby born on time. If you'd be so kind as to share with us some of your background, how it is that who your mom and dad were. You were born not in Connecticut, you've come here, some of that.
Well, I actually grew up in Alabama. I was born in New York. My father was from New York. My mother was from Michigan. But my grandparents were living in Alabama. My grandfather was working for TVA, having been an out-of-work engineer in the Depression. And so my mother and my father was in the Navy, and obviously it was World War II. And so my father went overseas, and my mother and I went to Alabama to stay with her parents. And when my father came out of the Navy about 18 months later, he found a job there, and we stayed in Alabama. So I grew up in the South.
I never knew that. I've known you since the 70s and never knew that. Isn't that interesting? Where in Alabama?
In North Alabama, a town called Sheffield, very small town, in an area very close to Tennessee and very close to Mississippi, right up in the corner of Alabama.
But you've never had a Southern accent.
I had, but it was people who lived there could always tell that I wasn't from there.
By birth.
Yeah, right. But
isn't that interesting? So how old were you when you left Alabama?
I went to college in Tennessee and then came to New England.
And where did you go to college?
Vanderbilt in Nashville.
And you majored in?
Political science.
Because?
It sounded interesting. I think I had some idea at that point that I might go to law school. But at Vanderbilt was pretty sexist when I started in 1962.
I was just going to ask you the date. Yeah, 1962.
1962.
Wow, the South in 1962. This transforms our whole conversation. I never knew this. It's just amazing.
It was an incredible gift to show up in Nashville in 1962 because the civil rights movement was flowering at that point. And I would not say that Vanderbilt was central in the civil rights movement at all. Their main claim to fame was that they fired James Lawson, who was teaching nonviolent confrontation to students at that point. He was a professor at the Divinity School.
The wrong direction.
Yes, but I found the people at Vanderbilt and in the rest of the university community in Nashville who were working on civil rights issues, and I had wonderful experiences.
What kind of town did you grow up in? Was it a little town?
It was a small town, sort of pretty conservative, southern, very segregated town. I was a junior in college before I ever went to school with black people.
I'm going to repeat that. You were a junior in college, so you were 18 years and 20 years old?
Yeah,
before you had
20 years old.
Your first black classmate?
That's right. That's right. Now, you all remember that the Supreme Court said in 1954, which was 10 years before that schools were going to be integrated. Didn't happen in my town until after I left.
So your school had no black students, or black students went in one door and you
No. Black students went to a different school.
An entirely different school.
Entirely different school.
Wow, that really shapes someone in a way that I, who was
Yeah.
born 10 years later in Connecticut, can't even begin to imagine.
I remember the week that the Supreme Court decision came down in Brown versus the Board of Education. I was in the 4th grade. And I remember it because my classmates, I had several classmates who were in a big uproar about how we were going to have to go to school with these bad people.
And they were so little. Obviously, that wasn't
Right.
their uproar. That was what they were
Right.
bringing to class
Right.
from mom and
And
dad.
I went home and said to my parents, what is this? And they said, it's a good thing. This is a good thing. You're going to be fine.
And yet it took another 10 years before the good things started to even...
Oh, yeah.
That tells us a little bit about your parents and who they were, and how did who your parents are shape you as you were growing up? You sound like you grew up in a more liberal home than many of those in your little town in Alabama.
I did. Yeah, there's no question about that. My parents used to joke about canceling out each other's vote because my father generally voted Republican and my mother generally voted Democrat. But they were they were liberals, particularly on social issues. Even my father, who thought that the Republicans were better on economics. Luckily, he didn't live to see the current economics. But he was always pro-choice. He was always a big First Amendment advocate, and my mother was certainly could have been described as a feminist, even though she didn't encourage me to get involved in fights.
She didn't.
Of various kinds.
She didn't encourage me to get involved in fights.
Well, she thought that you had to she sometimes said that you had to go along with what your culture said that women could be and do. Although I remember her being angry at Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, for saying exactly that.
And just to focus us in time, we're talking about your mom, of you as a young girl growing up, as a adolescent, as a college student, perhaps even when you got to law school.
Yeah.
How long ago? Is she still alive? And
No.
how did she take to the career you created? That's yet a different mother.
She loved it.
Okay.
She was thrilled when I said I was going to law school. The two times I can remember her being the most excited were when I called and said I was going to law school and when I called and said I was having a baby.
How wonderful.
And she actually moved, when my son was born, I was already working at Guelph, and she moved to New Haven and took care of him, helped take care of him.
And just for our purposes, Guelph is?
Guelph is the Connecticut Women's Educational and Legal Fund.
And that's CWEALF, and
That's
we
right.
all say Guelph like a household word in Connecticut, which it has been for a long time.
Yeah, it has.
But I want to go back to what you're doing. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
My mother was incredibly excited about the work against sex discrimination that Guelph was doing, and in fact said that by coming here and taking care of my son, that she felt like she was contributing to the women's movement.
Isn't that wonderful?
So it was
what
great.
a gift.
It was,
and
yeah.
How old was your mom at that time?
She was probably, she moved here in 65, and she died when she was 65. She died when she was 73. So she was here for those 8 years.
So the last 8 years of her life, a 65-year-old woman, you made her a feminist, even if she wasn't going to call herself that.
That's right.
Isn't that fabulous?
That's right. She would have called herself a feminist, certainly at that time.
Going back to Alabama.
Yeah.
So you had mom. You had a basic. You had the basic 1960s version of mom growing up.
1950s.
1950s. I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
You were in college by.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was that like?
Well, it was,
It was what you knew.
It was normal, right? Yeah.
And did your mom work outside the house, or?
My parents divorced when I was 12,
Okay.
and that was 1957, and that was very, very unusual. I didn't know another person whose parents were divorced until I was in college. So at that point, my mother went to work. She had never worked outside the home. She'd done a lot of volunteer work. She'd never worked outside the home. And she got a job right away running the Red Cross office in town. And then she went back to school and got a teaching certificate and eventually got a master's degree in guidance and became the middle school guidance counselor, and which was a job she absolutely loved. She loved middle school students. She loved being a counselor. She just loved it. And she did that until she retired.
So you had a role model in terms of having a mom who had an education, had worked outside of the home.
Yeah, and she believed, certainly partly because of her own experience, that women had to have work that they cared about and that would support them and their children if necessary. And she just kind of drilled that into me.
And so that informed you, you think, in part of...
Yeah.
And you're married. You've been,
Yes.
And you've been long married.
Yes.
Yep.
I married before I finished college.
And your husband's name?
John Watson.
And you said you married before, and you met John at Vanderbilt?
I did, yeah.
And it's a fabulous love story, right?
Of course.
You're still married. That's an exception
We're still
in our
married.
generation.
We're definitely still married.
And you have two children. They are?
They are Nicholas, who's 30 and makes television programs in New York, and Emily, who is 25 and teaches nursery school.
Wow. That happens fast.
Yes, very fast. When I first knew you, there were no children, right?
No children. I think that, well, let's see.
Maybe one small one.
One small one, I think, yeah. And I suppose we should say, just for the purposes of talk, because we talk in between the lines here about how we know each other, and that is that I came to know you back in the mid-'70s when you were at Guelph, and
Right.
I was a student intern there one year.
That's right.
And I have admired you, I want to say, and
Thank you.
and looked up to you for all those years.
Thank you.
And I can't believe that we're both grown-ups now, because I always
Yeah.
thought you were the grown-up and that I would never be there. So it's pretty fabulous. Although I really am struck by the sense of how unique your life experience was, and how I've known you all these years and didn't have any sense of where you came from, and your place in history has helped inform you, and how the civil rights movement, I think, plays into perhaps the woman's question for you.
Yeah. I feel like I couldn't have been luckier when I was born, and how and where I ended up. I mean, first I ended up in Nashville in the '60s, and with the civil rights movement sort of all around us, and then we moved to Boston in 1967.
We being you and John?
Yes, John and I. He was going to graduate school, and I thought I was going to graduate school, but eventually ended up going to law school. And at that point, the anti-war movement was what we got, and we got very involved in the anti-war movement. And then the women's movement was the second wave of the women's movement was really beginning at that point. And
so you were in Boston with the women's health,
Yeah.
all that stuff that is
Yeah.
just me being 10 years younger was
Right.
the really that I look to as the exciting, really exciting, passionate time
yeah,
of.
it was unbelievable. It was really wonderful. It was a great time to be there, to be young, to be involved in all this stuff.
Can you share more about that?
Well, when in 1970, I met someone who had just moved to Boston from Chicago. Her name was Phyllis Gelman, and she later came to work at Guelph. And the two of us went off to find a consciousness-raising group. We went to a group called Bread and Roses, which was operating out of the Old Cambridge Baptist Church, or Cambridge Old Baptist Church, I think. And they had meetings once a week, and you went and they talked about consciousness-raising groups, and then they passed pieces of paper around, and you signed up basically by what day of the week you wanted to go. And Phyllis and I signed up together for a group, and there were must have been about 8 of us, and we met every week on Sunday night for about 14 months. And by the end of that 14 months, everybody in the group had changed her life in some significant way.
Really?
I had decided to go to law school. Somebody had decided to go to medical school, and on and on. People had just made big changes in their lives.
So you were really, it was working. It was,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'm sitting here
Oh, yeah.
just thinking, wow, this is what you read about in the books.
Absolutely. Yep.
This is what was really happening in Cambridge in
Yeah.
1970.
Yep. And the people who
wow.
wrote those books were in those groups.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, it was my body's my cells. I mean,
Yeah,
there was
that's
the
That's right. Absolutely.
fabulous,
Yeah.
fabulous.
Yeah. It was. I mean, what a gift to show up there then. It was just the best.
You're making me more jealous all the time. This is not fair. From there, you decided, we're 1970, you're living in Boston. You say Boston, I presume Cambridge was some little piece of Boston.
Right.
You decide you're going to go to law school
Yes.
to change the world?
Yes.
To do women's
absolutely.
issues? Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because now you know you can.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So, I mean, the other thing that was going on in our lives then was that my husband was involved in a struggle with the draft, about
Okay.
the Vietnam War. And he eventually was released from the Army because of a lawsuit. He had tried to have conscientious objector status, and they had denied it, and they eventually drafted him, and then a habeas corpus suit was brought on his behalf, and he was eventually released. So, and at the same time, I got involved in a sex discrimination complaint at the place where I was working, which was the
Where
city
were
of
you
Boston.
working? Okay.
Well, it was the Boston Redevelopment Authority.
So you're in Boston, John's in graduate school, you take a job instead of going to graduate
Right.
school, doing whatever, and
Yeah.
you find yourself
Yeah. I was
creating a lawsuit, or?
Well, no, but I was part of a small group of people who
Okay.
created this lawsuit, and
What
brought
were you doing for the redevelopment?
planning.
Okay.
I was doing planning,
And you're with a political science undergraduate degree?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was mostly doing relocation planning, which was trying to figure out what to do with the people that the highways and urban renewal was moving out of their neighborhoods.
Boston continuously does?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some of the people who had planning degrees, the women discovered that they were being paid about $10,000 or $12,000 a year less than the men.
And back then, just to put this in time,
Yeah.
$10,000 or $12,000 would have
Was
been
most of their salary.
more than about half the salary, right? I mean,
yeah, it really was.
okay.
And it was a difference between making like 12 and 20, kind of was absurd. So we brought complaints at the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, and that suit wound its way through, and I think was eventually settled after I had left Boston. And three of us who had been involved in that work applied for and received a grant from the John Hay Whitney Foundation in New York to look at the employment of women by the city of Boston, not just the redevelopment authority, but the whole city.
So did you still have your job as a planner, or it was, you
Yeah.
moved from the planner job to the grant?
No, I still had the planner job, and then I left and went to law school.
Okay.
And the summer before law school, I think we all worked on this grant.
Okay.
I worked full-time and the others worked part-time because they were still working for the city, I think. And then I went to Northeastern Law School.
I was just going to ask you.
Northeastern had and still has a co-op law school. So you go to school for a year, and then you do 3 months of work, 3 months of school, 3 months of work, 3 months of school until you're done. And I had been out of school by this time for 5 years and couldn't imagine sitting in a classroom for 3 years at a time. And Northeastern already had a reputation as a school that trained public interest lawyers. It was not in the business of sending people to corporate firms. It was in the business of teaching people to change the world.
So we're talking Northeastern, and you started in 1971.
Yeah.
Okay.
I started in the fall of 71. So in the beginning of 71, I was looking at law schools, and I only applied to Northeastern. I
was gonna
only
ask you
wanted
that,
to go
yeah.
there. And
And how many women were there? Or did you know,
Well-
did you have any sense of, was the
That was
number of
in-
women, did that have anything to do with
yes,
picking it, or
Yeah.
just?
that was definitely another reason
Okay.
why I went, because at that point there were still, Harvard would have 3 to 7 women in a class. And Northeastern, my class at Northeastern was 42% women. So the class behind me was about that, maybe not quite. And at some point, women became half the class at Northeastern. But that was definitely a very strong reason for my wanting to go there. So I didn't want to be one of a handful of women in a class full of men.
It sounds to me, just to back up again, like the idea, the fact that you were a woman involved in the women's movement started when you got to Boston, or had it started earlier? Was there something going on at Vanderbilt about women, or was it mostly about civil rights and human rights? And
well, Vanderbilt was a very good training ground for feminists because it treated women so badly. When I got to Vanderbilt, women were required to sign in and out of the dorms. We had hours when we had to be home by 10 o'clock on weeknights. And
how many women were there? Let's put Vanderbilt in context. I know of it as a fine educational institution, but I don't know a lot about it. Maybe you could share some more about.
Well, it's a good school, and it's of course very different now from what it was when I got there in 1962. It at that point was to some extent a national university, but even more was one of the top Southern universities. So a large proportion of the student body was from somewhere in the South. And there was certainly a strata of sort of upper class. There was a fraternity scene which was not overwhelming. People didn't live in fraternity houses. So that was an element of the campus, but not dominant. There was certainly no women's consciousness whatsoever at that point. Women.
1962, the South.
Yeah. You were, for instance, required to wear skirts all the time unless you were going directly from your dorm to a picnic or a tennis game, or if it snowed and there was a special dispensation, you could wear pants to class. And the men had none of these rules. The men's dorms were open all night. The women were not allowed to keep liquor in their rooms. Men were. The assumption being that, you'd have a date with a man and he'd bring the liquor. I don't know. Anyway, it was.
And there were all girls' dorm. You were in all women's dorm, I presume.
Oh yes.
Yes.
Oh yes. Oh yes. The kind of place where if a man, if somebody came to change the light bulb, a man from the maintenance department, someone had to run in front of him yelling, "Man on the floor, man on the floor."
How things have changed.
Yes.
How many women were there and how many men? What was the sort of?
I'm not sure what the ratio was. They were very proud of saying that from the applicant pool, 1 in 4 men was accepted and 1 in 7 women. So it was much harder for women to get in. I think women were probably about a third of the student body, although I don't really remember. Maybe not quite. No, they weren't. No, because there were 3 or 4 men to every woman. So we were either 20% or 25% of the student body at that point.
And how big was the student body?
About 3,000 then.
And did you feel unique in that student body in terms of your political activism sense?
To some extent, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were a small group.
And by we, you mean the activists?
Yeah.
Did you meet John early on there?
Fairly early, yeah. I met him at the beginning of my second year.
So, and I presume he and you shared the same political bent? Right?
We did. He was an actor, and so he spent a lot of his time in the theater. Some of the time when I was doing political things, he was doing theater. But he was pretty active especially in the civil rights work on campus.
And that's what you were doing on campus was
Yes.
civil rights stuff. And were you involved in some of the marches and things going on?
Yes.
In the South? How lucky.
My roommate was arrested and charged with 61 counts of contributing to the delinquency of a minor because she went to a high school and led 2 classes out to a march downtown. My political science professor bailed her out and helped her figure out what to do. So it wasn't like the university, there was no support, but it was scattered support.
Seems incomprehensible sitting here in West Hartford at this time, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So I apologize for jumping around. I just realized there was so much there to talk about, and we had sort of skimmed right over it. And we get you back to Boston and back to Northeastern, and in this exciting time in the women's movement and in being in Boston. Your husband is struggling with the Vietnam War. You have a lawsuit that you're involved with. You see the law. And John, you said, was involved in a lawsuit as well, trying to work out his issues with the draft.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, I think all of that led to my really feeling like the law was an instrument for social change. And I recently read an article about how those of us who grew up with the war in court have this completely distorted idea about what the law is for and what it does. But I was certainly one of those people who thought, look what the courts can do. Look at Brown versus the Board of Education. Look at all these discrimination suits. So I went to law school to do that kind of work.
And it worked for you.
And it worked for me, absolutely.
Isn't that fabulous?
Yes.
So law school, you're in Northeastern, you spend your first year taking class, you spend the summer before working on this project.
Right.
And how did that go? Did that in any way inform what you did in law school, or?
Well, I actually spent my first 2 co-op semesters in law school working on that project. And then I moved on, and the other people who had the grant continued to work on that for a while.
And what you already told us that one of your mother's wonderful comments, life-affirming comments, was to be excited when you went to law school.
Oh, yes.
And how did your dad take it?
I was not in as close touch with my dad in those days, and I think he was pretty pleased, at least as soon as he was sure that he didn't have to pay for it.
That's probably like most parents about anything at this day and age.
That's right.
And John, you were married. You were developing a life together.
Yeah.
And here you're going traipsing off to law school. What was his response?
I think he thought it was a good thing. He's always been very supportive of whatever I wanted to do. I mean, we've never kind of tried to set limits on each other's choices. So he was pretty supportive. And of course, later he went to law school.
I knew that.
But later, that was later.
But later. And not necessarily just to save women.
That's right.
When you were in law school, you said you worked in this co-op program.
Yeah.
And can you share anything else about your law school experience that helped make you who you were, and the person that then came out and went on to the next event in your history of being a woman who has dedicated yourself, quite frankly, to women's issues?
Well, Northeastern at that time, and I think still to a large extent, was a place that really nurtured that kind of ambition for people in the law.
And by that kind of ambition, you mean an ambition to be an instrument of change?
Yes, absolutely. And my class was full of people who wanted to change the world in various ways, and who felt like law school was really supposed to be about justice. And it was a great atmosphere. I mean,
Again, I'm jealous.
yeah, it was a wonderful place, and the students were very empowered within the law school. We got involved in talking about what courses should be taught. We interviewed applicants for teaching jobs. It was a very sort of democratically run place. And then, of course, the co-op jobs. My last co-op job, I worked for Marion Wright Edelman at the Children's Defense Fund. And they were still in Cambridge. And I mostly worked on a case that the Children's Defense Fund had brought or was about to bring in South Carolina about keeping kids in adult jails. But
Again, another thing that seems so incredible to us right now when we look back, doesn't it? Yeah. It's who would imagine?
It's still happening.
Yeah, just is it?
Yeah, it's still happening in a lot of places. In fact, it got better for a while and now has, I think, gotten worse again. I mean, this whole move toward trying children as adults, the ages get lower and lower. But that was, to be working for her, for Marian Wright Edelman, and looking at the kind of work that she was trying to do on behalf of children all over the country was pretty inspiring.
Again, being there at the beginning. I mean, you don't look old enough to have been there at the beginning. That's not fair.
The beginning was not as far away as you think. It's pretty amazing.
It is pretty amazing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It's pretty incredible.
How far we came, and
right.
lest we backslide to there too fast. But
that's right.
So how did you hook up with the Children's Defense Fund?
I don't specifically remember. It must have just been one of the jobs that existed. They wanted a co-op student, and I interviewed and got the job.
Right place at the right time, as they say. Yeah. Wow. And how did that transform or inform what you did next?
Well, I think it gave me a vision of the kind of impact litigation that you could bring and make a difference in the world. And I think I think that's what I then thought. Well, I want to do this in the women's rights field. I want to do this kind of high impact litigation.
So when you went to law school, it was, I've got this need to help, and it was through the Northeastern Co-op program experience, your internships or your placements that helped you to really focus on how you were going to put that into place.
Yes, I think so.
From there, how did you make it happen?
Well,
I mean, all the young ladies who were listening
I didn't
to
do it
this,
all by myself.
listening to the show were thinking, well, that's not fair. We all wanted to do that too. And,
That's right.
and we're working in insurance companies or
Right.
whatever.
Well, I mean, the other thing that was going on was that while I was sitting there watching Marian Wright Edelman and thinking about what I wanted to do next in my life, there was a group of lawyers in Connecticut who were on the women in the law section of the bar, and they started to work on supporting a bill against credit discrimination.
We're talking about people involved in the Connecticut Bar Association at the time. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And they formed a committee, I think, to work on this credit discrimination bill, which passed. And then they kind of looked at each other and said, okay, what do we do next? And at some point, they had the idea to create a women's rights public interest law firm. So they incorporated as the Connecticut Women's Educational and Legal Fund.
And we're talking time-wise around when? If you recall?
73, sometime in 73. I think summer.
And who were some of those people?
They were Judith Maines, who worked for the telephone company, Ellen Estes, who worked for Yale, and then later Long Wharf, Jerry Davidoff, a lawyer from Westport.
A man.
There were men.
A man involved in the
Gene
women's movement.
Sosnoff, who was a lawyer in New Haven. At some point, Katie Rohrbach and Tom Emerson got involved. They were both people who had already done significant work for women in the law. The two of them were involved in the Supreme Court suit which overturned Connecticut's birth control laws. And
Which is
Griswold versus Connecticut,
state, yep.
right? Katie originally brought the lawsuit on behalf of Planned Parenthood, and Tom Emerson then got involved at the appellate levels. I don't know exactly at what point.
And Tom was?
He was a professor at Yale Law School at that point. He is someone who my husband's law school professor described as the man in charge of the First Amendment, and was an extraordinary scholar and litigator on constitutional rights.
And Katie?
Katie was a lawyer who worked both in Canaan, Connecticut, and in New Haven, and had supported liberal causes and justice for many, many, many years, starting, I think, with the Smith Act cases in the 40s, had defended people who were involved in peace work, in women's work. She was, I think, the lead attorney in the law which overturned Connecticut's abortion law, Women versus Connecticut. And she she represented Erica Huggins in the Panther trials in New York, in New Haven in the 70s. She just died this week.
And yeah, I was going to say, mention for our tape that Katie has been interviewed as part of this process,
Yeah.
and as part of our rich history of women in Connecticut, and
Yeah, she's one of the people who made all this happen.
helped make all of this happen.
All of it. And was personally a mentor to so many women in Connecticut. I mean, she was incredibly supportive and helpful and worked with people on whatever people needed help with, took in younger lawyers all the time and taught them whatever she could of what she knew.
I think it's fair that we both note her passing with
Yes.
sadness, and at the same time the joyfulness of all that the gift that she gave all of us women in Connecticut by her example and her hard work.
Yes.
So thank you.
Yeah.
So Katie is here also at the outset of the founding of Quelf.
Yes.
And so there's this group of people in Connecticut who are and I think that you said Shirley Beisowitz when we
Shirley
talked.
Beisowitz, of course, who was at that point the law librarian at the University of Connecticut Law School, and whose daughter is now the Secretary of State in Connecticut. Shirley would be incredibly proud. And Mary Morris-Wenig, who was a professor then at St. John's Law School, I think, and then came to Quinnipiac later. And a woman named Catherine Smith, who was in the Department of Education in Connecticut. So there was representation from a wide area of Connecticut's whatever,
legal
from
community,
all kinds
yeah.
Right.
And so while you were in Boston, these folks were down here in Connecticut
Yeah.
at a bar association meeting.
Yes.
Eating rubber chicken and thinking about what are we going to do.
Yeah.
And they did Quelf.
They did Quelf.
They
created-
imagined
Yeah.
Quelf.
They created Quelf.
Yeah.
And then in the spring of '74, when I was about to graduate from law school, they sent out job descriptions and said, we're looking for people to work in this public interest law firm. And I looked at that and said, that's it. That's what I've been looking for all this time.
Oh, fabulous.
And so I came down twice for interviews.
It was pretty novel to create a women's public interest law firm.
It was really novel.
Certainly, it was a time that it could happen. I can't imagine it happening now in the same way. Which, but just still incredible.
Ultimately, there was one in San Francisco, one in Philadelphia, one in D.C., one in Cleveland, and ours.
So, and that's what I'm
trying one more that I've forgotten.
Trying to emphasize. I mean, I think
it was one in the Northwest.
Having had Quelf in Connecticut, having had the luxury to have interned there myself when I was in law school and social work school, just thinking, well, here it is, and here I come. You look back at it and you think, oh my, we were one of 5 or 6 in America, in the world for. I mean, and it's right here.
Right here.
Our people in Connecticut conceiving it, creating it, making it happen, luring you out of Boston, and that nice warm nest of feminism to Connecticut. Thank you. We're glad you came.
It turned out that Connecticut was also a nice warm nest of feminism. It was
and I'd like to have you share about that some more. Yeah.
It was, well, first let me tell you about how we, Quelf eventually hired Ann Hill to be the executive director and me to be the assistant director. Ann had 3 years of experience in legal services.
We're talking 1974.
I had no experience
You're fresh
whatsoever
out of law
except
school.
my co-op experience.
Yep.
Neither of us had ever done test case litigation in our lives.
And Ann is also a lawyer. Ann was also a lawyer.
Yes, Ann was also a lawyer. We eventually figured out that one reason the two of us got hired was because they didn't have very much money. And if they hired us, they could hire 2 people. And everybody else had asked for more money. And so they could only have had 1 lawyer. So they took us because it gave them 2 lawyers. And they told us that they would hire us for $8,000, and whatever we could raise, they would give us raises. And in fact, we had substantial raises in the first year. But
where did that original seed money come from?
From the New Haven Community Foundation. Well, it's now called the Community Foundation. Then it was called the New Haven Foundation.
Okay. So these folks had come up with the idea. They had created a plan. They got some funding for it, and there we go.
And there
You're
we go.
hired. Okay.
Yep. And you asked me another question before that.
I can't resist. think we're talking about the founding of Quelf, and you were saying something about,
about the feminist community in New Haven.
the feminist community, and
in
we also
Connecticut.
had on the table test case litigation,
Well,
which are all really
all that stuff.
fabulous ideas that we have to cover before they make us take a break.
Well, one of the first meetings that I went to when I got here was a meeting of women to talk about how to frame issues concerning women in El Grasso's gubernatorial campaign. So that was the first thing. Here was El Grasso running for governor of Connecticut.
A woman to be elected governor in her own right.
That's right. That's right. And I went to a meeting at Wesleyan, at which Sheila Tobias, who was then a professor at Wesleyan and is still involved in women's issues, she ran the meeting. There was a woman named Barbara Lifton, who later was the national president of the National Women's Political Caucus. And I don't even remember who else was there because I didn't know any of them yet. But there was this group of women. And in New Haven, there was a very strong women's center that had all kinds of groups and support things going on. Within a couple of years after I came, we established the Connecticut Feminist Federal Credit Union and worked to extend credit to women in various situations. Quelf was connected to that sort of loosely, and it turned out to be a wonderful move in every way. So I had this fantasy that I would stay in Boston, but I've never regretted coming to Connecticut. It's been a good place.
Well, being a New Haven lover myself and having affirmatively moved there, I understand that.
Yeah, New Haven's a wonderful place.
It's a wonderful place, yeah. I think we can agree on that. But Quelf had two presences in Connecticut, did it not? It had a Connecticut, New Haven presence and a Hartford piece.
Yes.
Even way back then. I
Not in the
certainly
beginning.
it's a statewide
Yeah, not in the
organization.
beginning. We worked statewide from the very beginning, and we did a lot of traveling. And but we got, at some point, we received a grant from the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, which is the Hartford local foundation, sort of the equivalent of the New Haven Foundation. And they required us to open an office in Hartford, which, of course, we were delighted to do. So we opened the Hartford office, I think, in about 1977. So not quite 3 years after we opened the New Haven office. And we maintained two offices until after I left. And I left in 1980, and at some point after that, the New Haven office closed, and the Hartford office became the main office of Quelf.
So to focus us again in time, anchor us, you began at Quelf in 1974.
Right.
With Ann Hill.
Yes.
And you remained there until 1980.
Right.
During that time period, there was at least one office, New Haven, and sometimes two, New Haven and Hartford.
Right.
And during that time period, there were all sorts of exciting things happening that I want to get into in greater detail. You were there with Ann Hill for a short period of that time, or some period of that time.
Right.
And then she left when?
She left at the end of 1976, in December of 76. She left, moved to California.
And you became the executive
I became the director.
Director, which also meant
Legal director.
legal director. You were the person in charge of what that test case litigation was going to be.
Well,
But you had a board of directors.
I did have a board of directors.
we
And
have
the board of directors had a litigation committee, and it was their job to look at the cases that were brought to us and help us figure out which ones would have the most impact and were most important for Quelf to take.
And when you say us, so there's another person that
There
comes
was another. There were always two lawyers.
Okay.
First there was Ann and me, and then when Ann left, Quelf hired Phyllis Gelman, my old friend from my consciousness raising group.
Life comes full
who had
circle.
also by this time gone to law school.
Yep.
And
Wait, was that on her slip of paper too in those meetings, or did she have a different dream? This was her next
I
one.
think that was probably on her slip of paper.
How
It just took her a
fabulous.
year longer.
Fabulous.
So she came at the beginning of 77, and she was there she was there until the spring of 1980.
Okay.
And then she left, and we hired Donna Morris. And Donna stayed for a while after I left.
Donna's another attorney.
Yes.
Yep.
From New Haven.
It's just because we have the best pizza.
That's right.
So you're at Quelf, and you're at one time working with Ann, at another time working with Phyllis,
Yeah.
and you're doing what we call test case litigation, which means with the advice and counsel of a board of directors, which is made up of all lawyers, some lay
The litigation
people.
committee was all lawyers.
Okay.
The board was probably all lawyers when we started because it came out of this Connecticut Bar Association group.
Yep.
But as people were added, there started to be people who were not lawyers, particularly people who were involved in education and in public education about social issues. And then at some point they tried to make sure that there were some people on the board who knew how to raise money, which is always important on a board. I would say it took us a while to figure out that was important, but
finally you did,
But finally we
Quelf
did.
still exists, which
Quelf
is the-
still exists, which means somebody's been raising money for a long time.
And I was going to say, and that is one of the extraordinary things that makes it so unique, because out of those 6 law firms that you talked about early on, how many of them still do exist, if you know?
I know that the Washington, D.C. group still exists. I don't know any specifics about what they've been doing lately, but they are still doing litigation, I'm pretty sure, which Quelf is not. I believe that the group in San Francisco still exists, but I don't know much about that, and I haven't heard anything about the other groups in quite some time.
Just incredible that we have this unique little nugget gem here in Connecticut. And,
What I think one of the things that has developed and has been really important is women's rights projects of various kinds within law schools. I mean, Rutgers has a very strong women's rights project that was working when I was at Quelf. There were students working in this women's rights project, and it still exists today. And I suspect that those groups exist in law schools all over the country now.
so they've come up to fill some of the void that clearly existed, and that.
Yeah.
Let's go back to 2 things. First is Quelf, you say, isn't doing litigation anymore.
Right.
What is Quelf doing now?
Quelf does primarily public education and a lot of help for helping individual women find resources to solve legal problems. And they do a fair amount of political work, of lobbying. So they've worked on they've done a lot of work in sexual harassment in both training and public education. They've done work on equality within the educational systems. They worked in the voc tech schools, and they have a pretty broad mandate these days to work, but not specifically in litigation. They occasionally are peripherally involved in litigation. They have Ruth Polda has been their on-call attorney, of counsel, I think she is, to Quelf, for many years, and has written amicus briefs and various.
And she's a private practitioner.
She's a private practitioner in Hartford, but she has a lot of experience in women's rights work and has done really good work for Quelf in the years since Quelf has not had legal staff.
And that was my question. So after you left, and then Donna Morris was there for a while and left, Quelf moved away from the legal model or from the litigation model.
Right.
And with that move, it stopped having lawyers at its helm. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Moved towards having other people who were geared, who had different skills.
Yes. Yeah.
Litigation. What it was all about back then. The exciting time, you had test case litigation. What were some of those cases? And
well, I'll tell you about the first 2 cases that we filed in federal court. One was an employment discrimination case on behalf of a woman who worked at Electric Boat in Groton. And evidently, what had happened was that Electric Boat, which worked entirely on federal money, I mean, they were building submarines for the government, had been told that they needed to hire more women. And the person who came to us had been hired into the painter classification, but she was hired not as a painter, but as a painter-cleaner, which was a lower paid position than the bottom level of painter. And she came to us and she said, well, I was looking around and I discovered that all the painter cleaners are either women or minorities. And I don't think that's fair because we get paid the least. And there was no transition, there was no way to get from being a painter cleaner to being a painter. You were a painter cleaner, and that was the end of your classification. Whereas if you were hired as a bottom level painter, you would progress up the steps of becoming a more and more experienced and therefore more highly paid painter. So we talked to Electric Boat and eventually filed a lawsuit in federal court on behalf of all the women at Electric Boat, or maybe all the women in the paint department. I don't remember exactly what we did. And ultimately, completely changed that situation by the simplest of methods, which is if you're hired as a painter cleaner, you'll get promoted to painter. But
Sounds simple now in retrospect.
it does.
And how many
It
years
does.
and how much?
Many years.
Yeah.
That case was still going on after I left Quelf.
Okay.
Our client had been fired and put back to work, and fired and put back to work, and
And that was one of and that's one of the difficulties in test case litigation, isn't it? Because your plaintiff is only as good as your plaintiff is, and
Right.
your issue is always much bigger
Yeah.
than the individual, isn't it?
yeah. Yes, it is also generally true in test case litigation that you do more good for the group and the future than you do for the people who put themselves out there and bring the litigation.
And as I vaguely recall from my time working with Quelf and being on I served on the board for a little while after my tenure there, was that, and that becomes an issue when you're trying to run a
Yeah.
public service law firm of who are we serving, and
Right.
our clients now don't like us, but are they really our clients?
Yeah.
Because they just are the plaintiff that we happen to be using to
Yeah,
serve
it's a-
this issue. I
yeah.
mean, I recall some very fascinating, interesting conversations at the
Yeah.
board level as Quelf was trying to find itself. And
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that was always an issue personally for me and for the lawyers at Quelf, and certainly for the board and the staff, that there's always a tension between trying to fix things for this particular client and trying to focus on the big picture and how to change the whole system. In some ways, Quelf was good at finding plaintiffs who really cared about the big picture.
how do you do that? How do you
Well,
find a plaintiff for a test case litigation?
I don't know. I don't know how you do it. It's really hard, and nobody has ever figured out how to do it really well. And I think that this tension between the individual plaintiff or the individual group of plaintiffs and the class, the big picture, is something that the law itself struggles with all the time. You know, how do you protect the class and protect the named plaintiffs? And we had, because we were so visible, because we were a public interest firm, and because we kind of ran all over the state making speeches about women's rights of various kinds, people who also had some kind of ideological commitment to doing this kind of work would sometimes come to us
Seek you
with
out.
cases. And we had one case where we had one individual plaintiff, but she had her NOW chapter supporting her, and they actually joined the lawsuit as a plaintiff. And so she had kind of a built-in network of support, and I think that she really did care about changing the workplace in the long run as much as she cared about her own, in fact, more than she cared about what actually happened to her own career, which ended up going off in a completely different direction. But it's certainly always a tension.
Do you think that's partly why Quelf got out of the lawyering business, the test case litigation business, or do you think part of what happened was just our changing times, our environment, the environment for test case litigation, or could it perhaps just have been a personality thing of how the organization grew?
Well, I think there were a lot of reasons. Part of it was because we didn't really, none of us, the board or the staff, really knew how to choose cases. We ended up with too many cases, and things tended to slow down and not get done, and people got frustrated, clients got frustrated, the staff got frustrated, the board got frustrated, and it began to feel like it wasn't being very effective. And it got very hard to raise money for litigation.
Because the climate had changed.
I think so. I think so. And because there had been a lot of support for public interest law firms in the country for a while. And some of those, for instance, the Ford Foundation, which started New Haven Legal Services, had also done a lot of work in various public interest areas. And they were kind of over that. You know, they were moving on to whatever they were doing next. And so then there were the groups like us who found primarily local funding. And it just got harder and harder to come up with the money. Litigation's very expensive, and it's sometimes hard to show that what you're doing really has an impact over a large area. And I think people just started to think, well, you know, if we go in this other direction, maybe we'll make as much difference without having the struggle to do the litigation, to fund the litigation.
And that other direction was as Guelph moved forward into its more law-related education role?
Yes, exactly.
And the lobbying that you mentioned.
Right.
And where it seems to have found itself now as we sit in 2007.
Right.
We need to talk some more about that case.
Which case?
Those early test cases.
Yes, absolutely. Right. Are we taking a break?
Four, three, two, one.
Susan, we were talking about one of the significant cases that you had worked on at Guelph in terms of the electric boat case. Are there any other cases that were transformative of, in terms of women's issues that you recall that were really, that we unfortunately don't have as long as we could take to talk about that exciting time period in Guelph's history, your life, our life as women, but maybe one or two?
I think that there are a couple of things that stand out for me in sort of looking back over time. One was a case we brought against the unemployment system in Connecticut. We worked with legal services on this case, and Tricia Smith, who I had hired as a law student our very first summer, had by this time graduated from law school and was working for Connecticut Legal Services. She is, by the way, the labor commissioner of the state of New York now.
Fabulous. Look at that.
At that time, she was a legal services lawyer, and she brought us a client who had been laid off from her work and had signed up for unemployment. And then at some point, unemployment found out that she was pregnant and simply stopped paying her. They said, well, she's pregnant, she's not available for work. And of course...
It seems incredible now, doesn't it?
Doesn't it? Yeah. And so this, you have to remember, this was only a few years after the women in Cleveland brought a lawsuit on behalf of a teacher who was fired as soon as they discovered she was pregnant. And now teachers work as long as they can work, and they get a leave and they come back. But this woman agreed to be part of a class action lawsuit, and eventually we negotiated a settlement with the state of Connecticut in which they agreed that as long as you were healthy and able to work, and if there was a serious question about that, then you would have to get a note from your doctor, and you couldn't find work, you know, you met the other criteria for being on unemployment, that you would be paid your unemployment. And
tell me what year it was that we were in Connecticut and you still were deemed unable to, and you were, someone could be deemed unable to work just because you were pregnant. Isn't that fabulously Just blows my mind. It's like the kind of things our daughters would never believe.
That's right. It must have
kinds
been
of
about
things-
1978.
1978, you were instrumental in making the state of Connecticut realize that pregnancy was not a disability,
Right.
a bar to employment.
Right.
Just incredible.
Yeah.
It seems, it doesn't seem possible.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't.
But I think one of the reasons it doesn't seem possible is what has happened in sports. I mean, we started.
Well, but you're part of what's happened in sports, certainly in
the
Connecticut.
other lawsuit that we brought in the beginning of 1976, when we filed our first federal litigation, was an equal pay case on behalf of a softball coach and a basketball coach who were paid. The softball coach, I think I remember the numbers right, although it's hard to believe them now. She had won the state championship the previous year. And I believe that she had been paid $200 for coaching the softball team. And
At a local high school.
At a local high school. The man who coached the baseball team, which had not made it into the finals, in fact, I think had not had a winning season, was paid $800.
But they were boys.
Exactly. They were boys. There was serious sports.
They were
girls
boys
weren't
and he
serious
was a
sports.
man.
Yes. And we actually filed that lawsuit in federal court. We filed another lawsuit on behalf of a basketball coach in another Connecticut town. We filed 3 of these equal pay cases.
So we're talking about 1976, equal pay
Yeah.
sports.
They were not Title IX cases, although Title IX existed at that point, because they weren't on behalf of the students, on the behalf of the athletes. These were pay cases for the coaches. Obviously, they had the same kind of impact. And those cases all settled. The first one went fairly far in the court system. They all settled, and one of the reasons they settled was that the teachers' unions quickly got on board. In the first suit, the teachers' union helped us and was a co-plaintiff. Although the Board of Education tried to move them to defendant status because, of course, the wage had been negotiated and it was in the collective bargaining agreement.
Isn't that interesting? So you were doing for the teachers what their own union had failed to do for them.
Had not figured out to do. But the unions very quickly got on board, and what happened was that in the next negotiation season, all those differences went away.
How incredible for 169 towns in the
Pretty
state
much,
of Connecticut.
yeah. And so that was one of the early stages of equality in sports. And that, as you know, that has led to an incredible change in the world.
I know because my daughter is at UConn and cheers for the girls' basketball team. So
Right.
both she at 20
Right.
has had sports opportunities that we could not even imagine. Thank you.
Well, I first became attached to women's basketball because I was in Tennessee, and
The arch rival.
my cousin said there's going to be a great women's basketball team on television this afternoon between Tennessee and Vanderbilt, my alma mater. And he said, they're great teams, you've got to watch them. And I watched and I couldn't believe it. I mean, here was this school that wouldn't let me wear pants on campus, right? And we weren't allowed to be in the new gym. It was for boys. We had the old gym across campus was where we had our PE classes. There were no sports for women. And here it is, still, one of the top women's basketball schools in the country.
In spite of the obstacles.
I cried. I mean, I burst into tears when I saw this basketball game happening.
Is that so?
And then what happened was that the very next week, we came home. We'd been visiting in Tennessee. We came home, and Tennessee came to play UConn for the first time.
Really?
First time, 1995. And UConn won, and we were hooked. That was that. We've never looked back.
Isn't that incredible?
It's just amazing.
Well, you know, what a gift girls' sports have been for this generation of women.
Yeah.
For these many generations of women, not that we're
Right.
full generations, but
Right.
you know, again, I think one of the many things that are children and our children's children take for granted, or that there are sports for girls. And to think that you were at the forefront, certainly in
I think-
Connecticut, of making that more possible.
Yeah.
One of the things I did when I was at Guelph was lecture on Title IX. I mean,
Yeah.
that was one of my jobs. And
That's right.
I vividly recall going out and explaining to people that this was going to happen, and having people in the audience roll their eyes.
Yeah.
You know, like not over my dead
Can't be
body.
true. Right.
But you made it happen.
It was,
Your litigation, your vision.
well, mine and a lot of other people.
Well, yeah, but you had.
But it was exciting to be in on that. And we realized at the time, I mean, I remember looking at these cases and thinking, okay, you know, we're talking about a few $100s for an extracurricular activity. But talking about women in sports is really revolutionary, because it's talking about bodies. It's talking about how you perceive people's bodies. And if women's bodies are strong and athletic and competitive, then it's a very different situation from a world in which none of those things are accepted as truth. You know, if athletics and sports and strength and all that stuff only belongs to men, then the world is very different. And that's why I think it's connected to the whole idea about pregnancy. You know, is that you start to say women are strong, women are capable, even when they're pregnant. You know, even though they produce babies, they're still capable of doing work, of doing sports, and it changes the way the whole world looks for the women and for the men.
Thank you. Thank you for being there. Having three girls, daughters 15, 17, and 20, that always took for granted
Yeah.
that there were sports.
Yeah.
And having grown up when there weren't.
Right.
For me.
Right.
For sure.
Right.
My excuse. You segued from your time in Guelph into a new career.
Yeah.
That has still given you the opportunity to be involved with gender issues, but not in the same way. You're no longer on the forefront of advancing women's issues as an advocate, but I think it's fair to say that the issue of gender still comes into play. The fact that there is gender still comes into play every day in the kind of work that you do. What are you doing now?
I would say it comes into play in the kind of work that everyone does.
Everyone does. Although most people try to ignore it one way or another.
Well, now I'm a labor arbitrator.
Private labor arbitrator?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, self-employed. Even when I was at Guelph, I became an alternate member of the State Board of Labor Relations. So I started to work as a neutral in labor relations.
The State of Connecticut Board of Labor Relations, which does what?
They administer the labor laws of the state of Connecticut, which apply in the areas where the National Labor Relations Act does not apply. That is, all the public employment, the municipal, the state, and the teachers, and the smallest of the private employers, because the NLRA has a size threshold.
Okay.
So they decide unfair labor practices. They're called prohibited practices in Connecticut. They decide issues of elections and unit size and all that kind of labor law issues. And I was an alternate member of that board and then a full member of that board.
Well, you were
for
a
number of
woman, though.
years.
Was that pretty unusual to be a woman on that board? Or
It
was
wasn't
that-
terribly unusual. There had been women on the board from time to time. And there was a woman named Pat Lowe who was there when I was there and is still on that board. So it wasn't truly remarkable to be a woman on that board. The chairman of the board at that time was a man named Fleming James, who was a retired professor from Yale Law School and was by then teaching at UConn Law School, which did not have a mandatory retirement age. And he had been involved in the very early days of the National Labor Relations Act. He'd been a New Dealer in Washington and had come back to teach at Yale. And he and I used to drive up. He lived in North Haven. We used to drive up to board meetings in Wethersfield together fairly often. And he just taught me labor law day by day by day in conversations. And it was another extraordinary piece of luck, extraordinary
wonderful
experience
opportunity.
that I had.
So he was one of your, we haven't used that cliche word mentor,
Yeah.
but it's fair
He
to say
was-
that he was one of your
He
mentors.
was definitely one of my mentors.
Were there
Um,
any others that have?
Well, I would say that Tom Emerson and Katie Rohrbach would definitely count as mentors for me. There have been, people have helped me constantly. There have been amazing people. Wendy Susko, who was a judge here, was on the
One
board.
of my professors at UConn.
That's right.
Yeah, fabulous.
She was on the board of Quill for a long time, and she was on that litigation committee and was incredibly supportive to us as lawyers. And I would definitely count her as one of the people I have depended on the most in the world. There have always been people helping.
Yeah, fabulous.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get to a few of those in a minute. But back to labor relations and your work. You were an alternate on the board, and now you.
I was an alternate on the board, and I started to like the labor relations part of my work. You get tired of litigation. At least I get tired of litigation. I have noticed that the people who really like it, like my friend Phyllis and my husband, don't get tired of litigation. But I started to feel like it was easier I could see both sides a lot of the time. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice to be in a position where that was my job? Where my job was not to advocate for one side or the other, but to try to figure out what to do, how to solve a problem using the perspectives from both sides. And labor relations felt a lot like that kind of a place to me. And so at some point, the people I was working with in labor relations said, well, you should be an arbitrator. And it took me a while to make the shift and decide that was really where I wanted to go. But
Did you go back for more education?
no, I didn't. Other than driving back and forth with Fleming James, which
What
was
a
definitely
wonderful
educational.
education,
Yeah. Arbitration doesn't really have an educational path. Most people who become arbitrators now are lawyers, although not all of them. And it really is just a question of doing the work and having people see you and know that you can do what you need to do. You can figure stuff out and will be fair, and then you get hired. So the only criteria is, will someone hire you as an arbitrator? And it's a fairly slow process. And when I started to work as an arbitrator, it wasn't full-time work, but that was fine with me because by that time my husband had gone to law school and had a job, and we had small kids at home, so working not full-time worked well for me for a while. And then by the time I was ready, I was working full-time, and it's turned out to be. I sort of can't believe that there is a job like this that is so right for me, that I could like this much. It's the most wonderful job in the whole world. And I just can't believe I'm lucky enough to get to do it. It's just amazing.
Well, it seems only fair after your commitment to other people's causes that you would be able to do something like this. But I think that perhaps one of the gifts here is that you bring back to it a certain perspective that gives it more body. And maybe you could talk something about that perspective you shared with me when we spoke before this meeting.
Well, I have a friend whose daughter got a degree in, I think from Wellesley, in peace and justice. And we all said, oh, what's that? And he said, well, I said to her, he's also an arbitrator. He said to her, well, I've been able to make a living in that field. I hope you can too. And I think there's a way in which we hope that that's what we're doing. We're bringing peace and justice to the workplace. And that's a very exciting possibility. And I think that my experience in the women's movement, in other political movements, and just in the world, everything comes into play when you're doing this kind of work. And I discovered that one of the things that people seem to value is that I can diffuse a tense situation sometimes. That I run hearings in a way that tends to de-escalate the arguing. And labor law in general is an area where people try hard to get along because they're long-term relationships. You know, if you have an employer and a union, they're going to be working together for a long, long time. And you can't burn your bridges. You've got to be able to work with these people. So I think labor law is probably the easiest area in which to try to promote civility. I think that when I hear stories about the lack of civility in the law, I'm always surprised because most of that's not true in labor law. There are situations that get out of control, and
So what kind of arbitrations are you engaged in on an ongoing basis?
well,
for example?
I have a real variety. I do, simple one-time, somebody was fired, was it fair kinds of arbitrations. I do contract interpretations. And in Connecticut, we have a lot of arbitration of contracts, what's called interest arbitration, for teachers, for municipal employees, for state employees. And I've been very involved in that kind of work, especially for the teachers over the last many years. Which is really interesting, rewarding work because you get to look at how municipalities run, how boards of education run, what tax situations look like, what municipal finance looks like, and try to figure out how to make it work so that public education gets supported and taxpayers don't get completely bled dry, and it's a really fascinating.
It sounds
kind of a balancing act all the time, and lots of fun.
well, it's supposed to be.
Yeah,
Isn't it? Isn't that wonderful?
it's definitely supposed to be.
I want all those young people that are trying to decide whether they want to be lawyers to do it because it's lots of fun.
Yeah,
and
it is lots of
because
fun.
your career is just one of the many demonstrations of how many different ways,
Yes.
this is my shtick, you can be a lawyer and do many wonderful things with it.
Yeah.
As you have done. You've used your education and your personal commitment to
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I say, well, it took me a long time to find the part of the law that I really wanted to do, but even when I was doing litigation, which was really hard for me, I was having a great time because I was doing such exciting stuff.
in making such important changes in the way we live, certainly in Connecticut,
Right.
and in impact litigation. How exciting!
Yeah.
Something many people would have killed to
Right.
have had the chance to have
Yeah.
done. What's the most interesting case you've ever had, or been involved in, either as an arbitrator, as a if there is one, or one issue, one case? Is there anything that?
I would say I've had an awful lot of interesting cases. My favorite kind of arbitration is when I really get involved in an industry and start to understand what it looks like. And I've certainly done that in public education over a long period of time. I also worked for many years with the corrections officers in the state.
Wait a minute.
And that was really fascinating, I mean, to really get an understanding of what people's work lives look like. You know, the corrections officers several times took me on tours of the prisons to see what they're doing, where they are, and
To help inform you, as you said, as the arbitrator
Yes.
between them and between the union and
the state, and their employer. Yeah.
Wow.
And I think, I mean, that's the thing. That's one of the things that's really fun about my job is that you really learn what it is that people are doing out there all day. You know, whether they're running a machine that prints cardboard boxes, or taking charge of a prison, or teaching in a public school, or sitting at the IRS looking at returns. You know, it's you hear about it and you see what they're doing.
It's interesting because that makes arbitration very different than being a judge, where you don't, the way the model is set up, you don't get to do that. And nor
Right.
could you. It would be
Yeah.
inappropriate for you to become that intimately involved with.
Right.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I have to ask you about a woman who worked with you at Guelph, who I remember and who I know still works with you.
That's right. A
woman named Carmel Rotella.
Carmel Rotolo came to work at Guelph when she was maybe 19, maybe not even. And she had never heard of feminism or the women's movement or any of what we were talking about. She'd never met anyone who hadn't taken her husband's name, and was completely fascinated, and was incredibly willing to and excited about learning everything that we were doing. And
So she was a 19-year-old kid from New Haven.
from New Haven.
Yep.
That's right.
And you are a woman who grew up in the South, who's
That's
been
right.
to college, been to law school,
Yep.
been writing on slips of paper how I'm going to recreate myself in the next 14 months.
Right.
And she answers an ad and comes to work
That's
as a
right.
secretary?
Yeah.
A clerk at Guelph.
That's right. Yep. She was our secretary in the days when you still typed briefs on many copies.
With correct
With correct tape.
Yep.
That's right.
Wow. And Carmel is still a part of your life.
She is. Part of her time she runs a glass company with her husband, and part of the time she works in my office with me. And she doesn't type anymore, but she does everything that keeps the office running.
Mm-hmm.
And,
So your setup is you practice as if you were, your arbitration practice runs out of a law firm practice, basically?
well, no, I'm by myself. I have an
but
office.
I mean, an
it's-
individual law firm, would you call
yeah,
it a law
I guess it's
firm
like-
of one, a solo practice?
I
Is that-
suppose it is. I mean, when pressed, I say that I'm a solo practitioner,
Mm-hmm.
but although I don't consider myself a practitioner exactly. You know, it's really a separate kind of a practice. So, for one thing, I never have one client. I always have two. You know, I have the employer and the union,
Isn't that
or the employer and
interesting?
the employee. And I don't, obviously, I don't represent anybody
Mm-hmm.
except sometimes the state, sometimes the public interest.
Mm-hmm.
So, but
And so Carmel has stayed a friend and a colleague
that's right.
through your life,
Yeah.
and was there during those years that you were at Guelph and having babies, and was one of those wonderful pieces of the women's movement, of where there are women that come into our lives who
Right.
help make them,
That's right. Who make them work? Help make them work.
as was your mom.
Yes.
She came here so you could help raise your children with you.
Right.
And is, as was and is your supportive spouse.
That's right.
Do you have a comment on that, on the idea of how all of that plays into what you have been able to do with your life, or any thoughts on it?
I think there's no question that it takes a lot of people in anybody's life, and I had my mother supporting me. I had my husband who supported me both financially and in every other way. And it's certainly, a lot of what I did, I couldn't have done if I had been, for instance, a single parent, if I hadn't had people who I worked with who were incredibly supportive and helpful, if I hadn't learned what I learned from all the various mentors that I had. It's not something that you do by yourself. And the people that come into your life and form part of it are incredible gifts. I mean, Carmel is one of many incredible gifts that Guelph gave to me over the long term. And
Well, and your leadership to many of us women who saw you as a role model and as someone who was brave and daring, and it just seemed.
I hope so.
I was so young, and it just seemed like, well, that's what everybody does. I mean, you go to law school and then you go out and you save the world. I mean, it was, little did I know that I had gone to law school for it.
absolutely.
Very few people got that chance.
That's
and
right.
You were one of the very few people that ever got that chance. And I
Yeah,
think
that's
that's what
true.
is so exceptional and so extraordinary
true.
about your life, was you had the chance to do something, to be standing on the precipice and jump in with both feet and
Oh,
do
yeah.
it. And,
Oh, yes.
and swim and make it work. And,
Yeah.
you know, there were lots of people, as you say, who were there with you.
Yeah.
But you were the one in the water, in the cold water. And I admire you so much for that. And
Thank you so much.
I think that it's fair to say that your life transformed the lives of many women in the state of Connecticut,
I hope so.
both as a role model and as a litigator of test case litigation, and in all those other ways. It's been fabulous. Do you have anything else that you want to? I mean, it makes you sound like you're almost ready to die, and
I hope not.
you're very young.
I have more plans.
And so, what are those plans?
I don't know. I actually don't know what my plans are.
What happens next?
I don't know. I love what I'm doing. I've reached an age where people start to say, well, are you thinking about retiring? And I say, there's a lot I want to do, but I love what I'm doing so much. It's hard to imagine. I feel like I've come to a place in my life where things are pretty well arranged, and I'm sure once you get to every time you get to one of those places, there's a major shakeup coming. So
I was going to say, sort of pinch yourself and go, oh, I'm afraid it's working out.
But looking at what's happened to me over time, I can't say that I'm afraid. So far, every time something bad happened, or every time I left one place, something else opened up that eventually turned out to be even better. So I suspect even retirement will be great.
Any parting thoughts before we wrap up about what it's been like to have been a woman attorney in Connecticut during this time frame? Or what it looks like it.
Well, I do have one thought that I was thinking about this morning. When I went to the bar examining committee in 1974, one of the examiners questioned me about the fact that the people who recommended me on the form that you filled out for the bar examining committee were all women. They were my law professors, a lawyer I knew in Boston, and they were women. And he said, well, your people who are recommending you are all women. I said, yes, they are. They were also from Massachusetts because I was moving to Boston at that time. And he kept asking questions, and I eventually figured out that he just wasn't sure they were all really lawyers.
Isn't
But,
that incredible?
it wasn't so bizarre, because when I started to practice, we had a group called the New Haven Women Lawyers, which was any women in New Haven who were lawyers, in the firms, in the city, anywhere, and we all met for lunch at the Graduate Club.
And there was plenty of room in that
There
back
was
room.
room. That's right. That's right. It was a tiny group of people. It's impossible for me to remember that now. When you look at what the bar looks like now, it's fabulous.
Isn't that amazing? And the bar that is now more than 50% of us women. The other piece of it that we didn't touch on was, and Quelf was controversial. When I began my first job and I was on the Quelf board, I was asked to resign because it was too controversial for the law firm to have someone on the Quelf board.
That's pretty amazing.
And now it's just commonplace. Who would
Right.
think of that? But we didn't even think of that. What you were doing back then was considered so controversial and so radical. And in 1981, it still was. Even the Quelf board was perceived as something that was too controversial for our clients to have someone working for us.
Yeah.
Just amazing.
Yeah.
And now it's.
Right.
Anything else to add? It's been fabulous having had this chance to sit and talk with you. I feel so blessed that the foundation has undertaken this oral history, and that we're going to preserve some of this for the girls who come after us who don't know what it was like, and hopefully never will.
I hope they'll find out that it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alice.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate having had the honor of having done this.
Thanks.
Thank you.